Hello, and welcome to another Bojan vlog. How y'all doing? It's been a quick, not really quick, the opposite of quick. It's been a minute since I did a vlog entry, but I'm back, and I have a juicy one for you today. Just like me to start, to do a vlog on something that's quite complex after taking a hiatus. But anyway, so today's entry, I wanted to talk about something I've been meaning to do for a very long time, and also that is something that I think about very frequently, and this is a entry that I want to do about MBTI, right? So, like I said, I've been meaning to do this entry for a while, and if you've watched any of my, I think I've only done one other entry on MBTI, and I don't know if I actually mentioned it in any other videos, but it's certainly something that I think about a lot. It's a theory that I have a very close affinity to, right? Because I feel that it holds some very useful insights, I guess. You can derive a lot of useful insights from it to kind of, to kind of apply to your life and mainly to your relationships, right? Because there are a couple personality theories out there, right? There's MBTI, Myers-Briggs, and kind of one of the main purposes of this entry is to kind of, if you're new or if you know of the theory but you wanted some clarification or just, making sure that you have used it in the right way, then that's what I'm going to try to do in this entry, right? I do this, every single time I talk about MBTI, it's always trying to, do this anyway, to try and kind of troubleshoot for, like, let's say less than perfect applications of the theory, and I'm not saying I'm an expert, I'm by no means an expert, but I do feel that there is a lot of gray area when it comes to MBTI, and so that's kind of one of the primary goals of this entry. But MBTI is one. Another one is the Big Five personality test, which is very popular, as endorsed by Jordan Peterson, who I've talked about in previous entries. Dr. Jordan Peterson, I should say. There's things like Hexaco, the dark triad of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. And there's probably a couple I'm forgetting. There's Enneagram, which is also something I wanted to talk about at some point, but I haven't gotten to the point where I've developed my understanding of Enneagram enough such that I can talk about it with any degree of confidence. But believe you me, I have tried in the past to do it, but the result was always dissatisfactory or unsatisfactory. But the one that I always go back to, and I've touched upon each of these theories, the one I always go back to is MBTI, right? I think they're all useful in their own way. To take an example, Big Five, which is, like I said, something that Dr. Jordan Peterson is focused on in terms of psychometrics or other personality testing, I suppose. That's a very useful theory, but I feel that there's a crucial difference between Big Five and MBTI, right? I feel that the Big Five personality test is better like when applied to the kind of practical design of your life, right? In the sense that like it kind of teaches you where you're strong and where you're weak, you know. And you could argue that MBTI does the same thing, but the Big Five is more aimed towards kind of helping you design your life in such a way that kind of emphasizes on your strengths, right? So it's more of like a pragmatic tool, you know. So like, you know, towards career and like personal effectiveness and things of that nature, right? However, MBTI is more to do with fulfillment and interpersonal harmony, I guess, harmony slash relatability, right? I feel that that's the kind of crucial distinction after giving it some thought of my own, like the difference between those two theories. They're both very useful. I resonate more with MBTI because it's kind of, you know, if you know anything about me through these vlog videos, then you'll know what kind of person I am, right? And my kind of biases in the way of what I focus on, you know, and what I like to talk about, particularly on this channel. But like, yeah, but that's, to me, the crucial distinction between the two is like, you know, the Big Five is more for like, you know, practical applications in life and business and things of that nature, personal effectiveness, you know, and kind of highlighting areas where you might want to improve, you know, and that kind of thing. You know, it's more kind of like, yeah, practical, you know, pragmatic, you know. But MBTI is more about, you know, self-knowledge from the point of view of personal fulfillment and also interpersonal relationships, basically, right? I think that that's the place where MBTI shines over the Big Five. But again, they're different. They're both good, but, you know, that's just like, to my mind anyway, that's kind of the kind of difference between the two. If you're wondering which one you should follow, really, it just depends on what you value, right? But there's value to be found in both. But anyway, I just thought that I would touch on that before I started. But yeah, so like I said, one of the reasons I'm doing, you know, another MBTI entry, and I may do more in the future depending on demand, because I'm trying to make this entry fairly concise. You know, I don't want to. It's very easy to me to start kind of delving into, like, you know, all of the nuances and permutations of, you know, the differences between various types, right? And, you know, things of that nature. But like, I want to try and keep it as succinct and simple as possible in this entry. You know, obviously we'll get into a bit of depth, right? Because that's kind of part of the reason I'm doing this, this discussion, this entry. But I want to keep it as simple as possible and not kind of go into too much detail. And in subsequent entries, if there's demand for it, I can maybe talk a bit more about differences between types and, you know, things of that nature. But and like, you know, various physical manifestations of, you know, what this type does, what do INFPs do versus ISFPs, you know, that kind of thing. Although even if I did do that, it would be more rigorous, I would say. Well, rigorous isn't the right word. It would be more kind of esoteric, I suppose, as opposed to, like, you know, this general, like, oh, what do INFPs do, you know, that kind of thing. But anyway, so this is my approach to pinpointing whether or not you have the right type for yourself, and in general make, like, kind of grasping the theory to the level, to the extent that, you know, you kind of understand what it means, and for there to be less ambiguity surrounding it, right? The way I think about it, right? Well, first and foremost, right, you know, just as another disclaimer before I start, or another kind of you know, kind of point before I start, is that, like, my version of MBTI, which in my opinion is the more useful one, you know, and you can argue this, right? You know, there are two versions of Myers-Briggs, right? There's the version that is the one that is more widely known, which is based on the four letters, right? And both versions of Myers-Briggs uses the four-letter, representation, INFP or like ESFJ or INTJ, However, the more widely known version utilizes like a very simple, or I should say simplistic, kind of dichotomy layout where you have we have four dichotomies basically. You have extroversion, introversion, sensing, intuition. Then you have thinking, feeling, and you have judging, perceiving, right? And that's what the theory is based on. And what you tend to see is you take these online personality tests, and they give you a percentage score. I am 45% extroverted and 55% introverted, right? And it gives you that for each dichotomy, each of the four dichotomies, right? And that's what most people kind of utilize, right? And like maybe if you stumbled on this video, that's the version you're familiar with. And you think of those four traits in a very linear and separate way, right? And that's great, I guess, as an entry-level kind of understanding of like, okay, like, oh, I see, it's because I'm introverted and they're extroverted, or like I'm more of a thinker and they're more of a feeler, right? Or I'm more of a judging person, so I'm more on time and I'd like to stick to plans and have a plan and to be prepared. But they're a perceiver more like, so like they're more kind of spontaneous and like they never do anything until like they have to, kind of thing. And that's how most people understand it. However, there is a deeper version of the theory, I would say, which is the one that derives from Jungian psychology, specifically his theory of the cognitive types, right? And that's the one that involves the 8 cognitive functions, right? Which I detailed in my earlier entry of MBTI, which I did like at least 4 years ago, some crazy stuff like that. But if you want to know more in depth about, if you're like, there's another version, like what the hell is this about, and you're interested in that, then I'll link the video in the description and on the in the end screen cards, so you can check that out. But yeah, so that's the one that's based on like cognitive functions. You'll hear people talking about like, oh, he's using his extroverted feeling, or like he is he's an FI dom, he's an introverted feeling dom, right? This kind of stuff that you might, if you've ever gone into like Personality Cafe or any of these websites or forums that discuss Myers-Briggs, then you may have seen these terms, and like you may or may not understand what they mean. But I'll kind of give my insight surrounding this, because since my first video I've actually been developing my thinking surrounding this, right? And I don't know what kind of proportion of what I came up with is A, bullshit, and B, like something that's already known, but I'm just not aware of it, because I just literally just think about it on my own, right? It's a theory that's so interesting and deep to me that like I always just come up with novel thoughts about it, right? And like that's something that I can't really say about much else, to be honest, which is why I'm doing another entry about MBTI, honestly. It's because it's such a deep theory that like, yeah, I just can't help but to keep thinking about it. And like through thinking about it, I found that there are very useful applications of it. And so yeah, okay, so in this entry, I want to kind of share those insights with you, and hopefully that should elucidate for you. If you know your MBTI type, right, it will help you understand if it's the right one for you. Like what this means in terms of how you're built, in terms of like what are the ways that you prefer to design your life towards personal fulfillment, right? So like I said, right, MBTI for me is something that is very useful when it comes to like aligning your life towards personal fulfillment and also understanding how you relate to other people, particularly in terms of like finding people who have a similar type to you, right? Maybe they're of the same type, or like they belong to the same quadra, which is actually not, that term quadra is not actually something that is within MBTI vanilla, let's say, but there's a spin-off, I don't know if that's the right way of saying it, but there's a theory called Socionics, which is based off of the Jungian psychological types, and it has a classification where it takes the 16 types, right, and it groups those 16 into 4 groups of 4, right? Within each group, the 4 types in each group, like they possess, or let's say they value the same 4 cognitive functions, right? So it's like 4, 4, 4, hence quadra, right? But like, finding people of the same quadra, if you want to have relationships that kind of align with how your natural disposition is in the way that you like to go about your life, right? It's not necessarily what you value, right? So like this theory, like MBTI, in my opinion, or at least how I've thought about it, is not something that will help you to figure out what you like per se, but it will give you a good idea to like in what direction you want to move in, right? Because ultimately, I think something like Enneagram might be better, because I think Enneagram is supposedly better for like your core motivation, like the thing that kind of the things that you value deep down, right? So it's not going to teach you like what you like per se, but it will give you insight into how you should go about your life, so as to maximize the potential for you to find and to design things, lifestyle things that will bring fulfillment to you, right? And lastly, it also helps you to understand what the differences are between you and other people who are of a different type, right? And the last disclaimer I'll give before I launch into it is that, like, I've said this before, right? And I say it every single time I do any entry. Either it's controversial or that it's tackling like some kind of like a theory like this, right? Which is, you have to take this is something I have to constantly remind myself. It's like MBTI is a great theory, right? It's like it's very polarizing in a sense, but like to me, I really love the theory. But I do know that there's a danger that it could become an overly prescriptive thing, because I've seen instances where I've employed the theory, but when I flip, let's say I entertain the idea that, oh, I might have mistyped myself or mistyped someone else, then I can feel my whole kind of perception shifting, and that's a red flag that tells you that like you're too deep in the theory, you're too entrenched in it, right? And so like you need to kind of keep a suitable degree of distance and be like, okay, the theory isn't everything, right? It can't tell you everything, right? It's very tempting to kind of be like, oh, this theory is so good, I can apply it to everyone and everything. It's like, no. It's like you have to, when you're dealing with people, you have to kind of go beyond just, extrovert, like kind of like the cognitive functions, right? To see like, yeah, you like, maybe you can try out a different personality metric, or or common sense, right? The point is that like, there's a danger for you and myself to become overly entranced with something like MBTI and to kind of judge everyone like they're a textbook like personality type, and like that's not, beyond a certain point, that's unhealthy, right? And you have to know that line. As long as you know that line, you can use the theory, you can think about it, Anyway, all of that out of the way, let's launch into it, shall we? So, okay. So, the first question I would pose, and this is not a question that is ordinarily posed when you're starting in your typing process in MBTI, right? And this isn't necessarily like, you have to start this way, but for me, this is one way that makes it easier, right? because it kind of cascades out and allows. Let me get into it, right? So the first question I would ask you is, are you extroverted or introverted, right? Right, because we can think of your personality structure, which is very complex, right, and very, multifaceted, as being a composite of an extroverted personality and an introverted personality, right? Again, this isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all, it's not necessarily the most important way of kind of, conceptualizing of your personality. But I feel that, particularly when it comes to MBTI, this is very useful, right? So, like, are you extroverted or introverted, right? And, like, that should be a very simple question to start with. Like, for example, I'm an introvert, like, doesn't mean that, like, I'm completely introverted, but, like, the question is, like, what are you predominantly? Are you predominantly extroverted, aka you're outgoing, you're adventurous, you love, like, grappling with the outside world, and you're not scared of that, right? Like, you live to be an explorer, right? You live to be amongst people, right? It's not necessarily people, but it's like you don't stay in the house, right? You go out, you explore, right? Your energy is very much outgoing, right? You don't like kind of being stuck by yourself and it's quiet and there's nothing happening. You're not a fan of that. You'd rather kind of be in the world doing things, right? Interacting with the world, right? Versus an introvert like myself, you find, you like peace, more than, it doesn't mean you don't like going out. It just means that you spend the majority of time by yourself, just like either contemplating or like relaxing, taking things at your own time, like too much stimulus from the outside world is overwhelming to you, right? It's, in some sense, I'm beating a dead horse. Like, the reason I start with this is because it's something that's very easily identifiable. You're either an extrovert or an introvert, right? And from this, right, I move on to the point I just laid out before saying that, which is that you can think of your personality and the personality of everyone, right? At least, how I think of it, as constituting an extroverted personality and an introverted personality, right? Because you need an extroverted personality to meet with the world, right? You need an aspect of your personality to be outwards looking, so that you can meet with the world and garner resources and gain information, and to build on your competency in interacting with the outside world, right? You need an outgoing portion of your personality so that you can meet in the world, like you can meet the world, right? It's like your bridge to the external world. But you also need an introverted personality, right? The introverted personality is where you can rejuvenate your energy, right? When you're done, interacting with the outside world, you take what you have extracted from the outside world and you internalize it, and you use that to let's say rearrange your working, your system, your internal system, such that like it's at the optimal and best health it can be, right? It's also where you align with your health, and also your purpose, I suppose, right? That's kind of jumping the gun a bit, but like that's where your purpose and your identity are, right? It's that part of you that is you, right? And that part of you is where your identity, where your uniqueness comes out, right? Because without an introverted personality, you would have a very diffuse identity, right? Because you are lost in the chaos of the external world. You need a place to retreat to, where you can recenter yourself with who you are and to be in optimal health as a consequence, right? So you need both an extrovert and introvert personality. However, each of us has a preference, you know. Each of us tends to be the case that each of us has a preference for either the extroverted personality or the introverted personality, right? So, from there, we start stepping into the Jungian side of things, right? So, like, I don't know if Jung was. I don't think he was. You know, the one who identified. He could have been. Like, again, I'm not an expert on this. I probably should read more on about this, to be honest. But it's very heavy, right? Jung tends to be very heavy. But there are the four modalities, right, by which you receive and then process the information that you receive as you exist, right? And those, I call them the mental functions, but like they are two sets of two functions, cognitive functions. Well, I don't want to use cognitive functions, mental functions. And those are your two perceiving functions, which are sensing and intuition, and your two judging functions, which are thinking and feeling, right? So again, I don't want to go into too much depth in defining these. I've already defined them. Like, watch my previous video to know what they are, what they're about, right? But so you have two modalities by which you receive information, right? And you have two modalities by which you process information, right? Hence perceiving and judging, right? Two perceiving functions, two judging functions, right? And if you're familiar with, you know, like the deeper version of Myers-Briggs, then you know that these functions can either be extroverted or introverted, right? And it just so happens that the way that the psyche, or at least, you know, based on the theory, right, you know, the way that the psyche prefers to manifest these four functions is that it takes, first of all, it takes each pair and it forms a dichotomy in terms of which function is extroverted and which one is introverted, right? Because in a sense, each, you know, like the perceiving pair, sensing and intuition, they are opposite functions, if you will, because they deal with opposing sources of data, let's say, right? They deal with conflicting senses, conflicting sources of data. And so the way that the psyche prefers to arrange them is that it extroverts one of them and it introverts the other one. And the same is true of the judging functions, right? So for instance, if you're thinking, let's start with perceiving. If your sensing is extroverted, right? aka, like, you know, the way that you like to interact with the world externally is physical, then the way that you then extract meaning, which is intuition, right? Intuition is about, like, connection. Sensing is about content, right? You know, it's about physicality. It's about stuff, right? You know, and intuition is about connection. You know, connections between the kind of hidden connection between those things, right? And so, if your sensing is extroverted, then your intuition is introverted, and the same is true of feeling and thinking. If your feeling is introverted, like me, I'm an INFP, right? So I'm an FI Dom. If your feeling is introverted, aka, like, feeling is how you are internally, then, like, the means by which you approach the world, you know, in terms of thinking, which is the opposite mental function, or the other pole of this judging pair, it's extroverted, right? And so like so for instance, I'm an INFP, so my function stack is introverted feeling, FI, extroverted intuition, NE, introverted sensing, SI, and extroverted thinking, TE. An ESTJ right? Which has the same functions as someone like me. So if you're an ESTJ, your functions are completely and exactly reversed, right? So you have extroverted thinking at the top and introverted thinking at the bottom, right? And the thing that I like about, I mentioned the Socionics Quadras, the thing I like about that is that like it groups these 16 potential types from the 8 cognitive functions into 4 groups of 4 types that value the same 4 cognitive functions, right? So that means that if you're in the same quadra as someone, even if you're a different type, so for instance, if you're an ESFP, right, you're a gamma, right? And I'll go along these briefly because it's important to what I'm discussing here. But if you're an ESFP and you meet with an INTJ, right, who is also a gamma, because again, same 4 cognitive functions, SE, NI, TEFI, right? You know, the preference of those functions is different, right? They're reversed between those two specifically, but the functions are the same, right? The functions are the same. And so, for instance, if you were meeting with someone of the same quadra type, then it would make for a very, very harmonious interaction. You'll feel seen, you'll feel heard, you'll feel understood, right? Whereas if you converse with someone of a different quadra, particularly if it's one that has like completely different cognitive functions, then you'll have a more difficult time, right? And there are other, ways of stacking and, aligning the functions that produce different, consonances and dissonances, if you will. But okay, so those are the quadras, and that's why I like to implement the Socionics Quadras into my own thinking of MBTI. But so we're at the 8 cognitive functions, right? The 8 cognitive functions are the total possibility of all of the 4 mental functions, the 2 perceiving functions, sensing and intuition, and the 2 judging functions, thinking and feeling, either extroverted or introverted, right? And as I said, right, the psyche likes to dichotomize each pair and stack them in such a way, based on that those dichotomies, right? So again, if you want to know more, then you can read up about it on Personality Cafe or something like that, or you can watch my prior video. But what this actually does is that it sets up for a function pair that exists when you're utilizing your extroverted personality, and the other pair of mental functions when you're utilizing your introverted function, when you're in your introverted personality. So let me explain. So, for example, myself, I'm an INFP. I'm a delta. I have the 4 functions FI, TE, SI, and NE, right? And that means that, like I said, right, I have an extroverted personality and I have an introverted personality, right? And I'll go into more detail in terms of like, how do you tell what's your extroverted personality versus your introverted personality? What does that mean, right? I'll go into a bit more detail in a second. But I have an extroverted personality, which I'm showcasing now, actually, right? Which is comprised of my extroverted functions, which are NE and TE, right? Meaning that my extrovert personality is a personality that loves to explore many different possibilities and to analyze them, right? Hence, extroverted intuition, extroverted thinking. The way that I love that, what I do when I'm extroverted, right? When I'm like, out there in the world, right? Is not doing things physically, right? Like a gamma type would, right? Because a gamma type would have extroverted sensing, extroverted thinking, right? Which is to explore, to improve, to gain, right? To like interact with the world in a physical and analytical way. In terms of like they're very practical, but in like a very kind of like I guess success, materialistic, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, but like, you know, whereas a gamma type would be more materialistic in like the way that they're extroverted, right? They love being in the real world and like trying stuff and like trying to succeed in the physical world, sports and things like that. My way is a delta. So if you're a delta, if you're either an STJ, and as I go through the quadras, I'll list all of the different types as well. But if you're an STJ or if you're an NFP, then the way that you'll notice, right, that the way that you are extroverted is that you love discussing like a bunch of, theories about meaning and philosophy and that kind of thing. Hence, I'm such a big fan of MBTI, right? And just, this kind of thing in general, right? That's my extroverted personality, right? So this is going deeper than most people's understanding of what extroverted and introverted means. Right? Most people, understand extroversion, for instance, as being, oh, you're energized by being social, right? And if you're introverted, then you're energized by being alone. And that's useful as a guideline, but it's not entirely accurate, right? What I'm proposing here is that you do have an extrovert, you have both. You have a preference for one. In like my preference is for my introvert personality, which I'll get to in a second. But you have an extroverted personality and you have an introverted personality. And the extroverted personality and introverted personality across each of the quadras is different, right? In terms of what functions are utilized for each personality, right? So I like to discuss. I'm a talkative person, right? I'm not a physical person. I'm a talkative person. I love talking, right? You might have noticed that in these entries. I love talking. I love running off different theories and like making connections and like, oh, that's relevant. Oh, this is cool. Oh, this theory is amazing, right? Like I love discussing concepts and like kind of like jumping from concept to concept and like kind of like exploring and expanding that as much as I can, right? That's my extroverted personality. Now, my introverted personality is comprised of introverted sensing and introverted feeling, right? When I'm alone, when I'm recharging, when I'm feeling myself, I love to just surround myself with beauty and sensuality, right? I'm a very sensual person. Like, but it's very within. It's like I love being in an environment that's like beautiful, and like that's why I love being in nature, and like it's like I love experiencing that peace of just being like not necessarily alone, but being in an environment that's harmonious and beautiful, right? That's one of my favorite things. I put on my favorite music. A lot of that music when I'm in my introverted mode is very relaxing and sensual and full of deep feeling, right? Which is a combination of my introverted functions, introverted feeling, and introverted sensing, right? So if you're a delta, if you're either an STJ or you're an NFP, you should relate to this, right? You'll notice, like again, to reiterate, you have an extroverted personality and an introverted personality. You have a personality that comes out when you're outgoing, right? When you're doing stuff. And you have a personality when you're alone, you take some space away from the external world and you're relaxing, right? Your extroverted personality as a delta is that you love discussing, right? You love talking. You love expressing yourself verbally, right? You love thinking. You love being amongst people and having like these really extensive and intellectual conversations, right? You love like discussing like various different tidbits of like concepts and ideas, and like that's what you love. You love discussing crazy theories about things, and and exploring like the ideological landscape, let's say, right? And when you're introverted, you feel more you like it like you like being you like kind of being in a, in a place where you can feel at peace, and you can kind of be in touch with your sensations in a very slow and savoring way, right? You're very like you just love like kind of feeling in a very deep and sensual way, right? That's how I am, right? So that's deltas, right? I just kind of started on the end. I guess we'll go from end to. I was supposed to start at alphas, obviously. It's alpha, beta, gamma, delta, but we moved to gammas, right? So these are your SFPs and your NTJs, right? Now, these people have an extroverted personality of SETE. So like I described earlier, right? They love like when they're extroverted, they love like doing things, and not just any things, but doing things that are cool, right? Doing things that like are challenging physically, not necessarily difficult, but like they're interesting, right? They love like like what's the newest gadget? What's like some sport they've never tried before, and they're gonna try it, and like if it looks sick, they want to like just launch themselves into it and like get involved and like test themselves physically, right? Yeah, they love new things. They love new technologies, right? They love like kind of exploring different places and seeing how people do things, and they like to kind of also test their bodies and like they like to test themselves physically in such a way that like it's like they just want to see what's possible, right? They love testing what's possible, right? Can I like if I try the strategy out, like will it work? Like if I do this motion, like will it push me forwards in like in whatever I'm doing, right? They love like just like testing themselves physically, right? They love pushing themselves, not in terms not to show how tough they are, but it's just that's where their interest is. When it's like they love like just like being part of like just like yeah, like new stuff, new tactics, like new like new and better ways of doing things, right? New ways of pushing themselves so that they can like develop new skills, and like they can get like better things, right? They can make things better, right? Technology and all this stuff, right? So that's their extroverted personality. The introverted personality is comprised of NI, FI, right? And so when the gammas retreat, when they have some alone time, it's usually spent visualizing, right? They and not necessarily in terms of like imagery, but they just sit there and they think, and they think about what people have told them. They think about how they feel about what people have told them and what other people think, their own thoughts. They think about ideas that are important to them, right? And they just spend their time kind of in their head, kind of like painting this picture that's very kind of vivid and special to them, right? So like contrasting with myself and other deltas, right? For us it's like we like to be in an environment that's harmonious and sensual. Like we love to just be in nature or like somewhere beautiful, listening to our favorite like relaxing or like dreamy music, right? And just really kind of like being in touch with sensation and feeling, right? The gammas, their introverted kind of experience is more kind of spent visualizing in thought, right? They love to just take the time to just think really carefully and to apply that to feeling, like what people have said and what the meaning behind that is, right? And really kind of sorting out what their thoughts are on about life and what's important to them, right? They love kind of thinking about like, you know, what the people in their lives mean to them, you know, what life means to them, and what kind of person they want to be, right? You know, what kind of like where they want to go. They really want to just like sit, like, you know, kind of be there and just like think things through, you know, very deliberately and very like meaningfully, right? So that's gammas, right? Betas have introverted, extroverted sensing, extroverted feeling as extroverted functions. Then they have introverted intuition and introverted thinking for their introverted functions, right? So these are your STPs and your NFJs, right? Now, the betas, right, are anything but beta, well, or at least in terms of their extroverted function. So one thing I'll say is like we're going into so there's different ways you can kind of mix and match these quadras even, right? Even though the quadras are a very useful way of separating out the 16 types, you can still kind of mix and match them, right? But like we're moving from the FITE users to now the TIFE users, right? And like I'll go into that in a second as well. You know, the difference between the different personalities, and you know, ones that value different functions, right? But we're now moving into a domain where it's more kind of okay. Let me just describe it because it's kind of different, and it's, you know, I have to kind of describe it to actually paint it properly. But so the extroverted personality of beta types is the extroverted personality of beta types is extroverted feeling, extroverted sensing, right? So in a sense, they're similar to the gamma types. They live very much in, like, when they're extroverted, when they're out in the world, they're very much physical, right? They're not trying to have crazy conversations and like discussing their point of views like in a very kind of like extroverted way. It's more physical, right? But the difference between gammas and betas is that the gammas, like, it's more kind of like, it's more like based on like practical things, if that makes sense. It's like the gammas are like trying to like push themselves and to see what's possible and to like try out different things and that kind of thing. Whereas the betas are more sensational, right? That's the big distinction, right? Because they have FE. So what they're doing is that they love trying different crazy shit, right? They might try drugs, right? They might try different weird kinky sex. They might try theater, like, you know, betas. There's a cliche, like, you know, in, you know, things like Personality Cafe, where like betas are very theatrical and they love acting and shit like that. Yes, because they love kind of expressing themselves physically and sensationally, right? So they love like just like loud environments and like kind of like, oh yeah, and like, you know, like making like being very loud and obnoxious, but not to be a dickhead or anything, right? It's like that's just how they are. They love kind of like loud and emotionally explorative environments, you know, and that's how they are when they're extroverted, right? You know, it's like they love partying. They love kind of like just being like really, I guess, nasty, but not necessarily. But it's just like they're very physically expressive, right? The gammas are physically explorative. Let's say they're physically kind of explorative, I guess is the word. But like the betas are physically expressive, right? They love expressing themselves in loud and like over the top ways, and like just like you know, that kind of thing, right? It's just loud, you know, expressive, just like, you know, it's sensual. Like, this is the thing. This is another dimension, right? It's like this is something that deltas actually share with betas, right? But the thing is that deltas and betas have the opposite orientation in terms of the extroversion and the introversion, right? You know, I like environments where I'm very, you know, I'm sensual, but my sensuality is very kind of like very slow and gentle, right? And deep and zen. But like, and the betas also are sensual, but like they're that way in an extroverted way. You know, they love like going over the top with that, right? They want to kind of just like have fun, really. You know, that's how they have fun. Is just like to be like crazy, right? And then their introverted side is introverted intuition and introverted thinking. So like behind all of that, you know, like crazy, I guess, hedonism or hedonism, however you say that, there is a very central philosophy, I would say, behind what the betas do. It's like there's some kind of purpose, some kind of message that they have at the center of everything they want. It could be something like, you know, everyone has a right to be themselves and to champion what they love, right? And that might be that beta's cause, right? You know, if you're an NFJs have this quality, I guess, right? Because they have the NI side of things, right? But like, you know, and it's like they have this philosophy, right? This purpose, this crusade, right? That kind of stands behind what they're doing, right? And that stems from kind of like just a very kind of focused thought. That comes from a very kind of central very central thought that they have, right? The way that they kind of view the world, like they have a very kind of direct way of viewing how not necessarily how the world should be, but like how they should operate, and you know, things of that nature. Okay, so they have a very so all of kind of behind when they're kind of retreating, they kind of come back to this thinking that they have in terms of like, you know, am I closer to what I'm trying to do in the world, right? Am I honoring my central philosophy, you know, whether that be, you know, like I want to champion kind of love and peace, for instance, right? I want to champion kind of free expression, right? This is a big thing for betas, I would say. You know, again, I don't want to delve too much into motivation because that's slightly different. But there's a tendency of like betas kind of like being like, I'm me, and I have a right to be me, and I want to be me as fully as possible, right? And I want to do whatever my heart tells me to do, and like that kind of a thing. There's a central philosophy to what the betas are doing, right? So that's the betas, right? The alphas, lastly, they the alphas have, as an extroverted personality, extroverted intuition and extroverted feeling. And for the introverted personality, they have introverted sensing and introverted thinking, right? So the extroverted personality of alphas, right? So these are your NTPs and your SFJs. They love, in the same way as a delta like myself, right? They love kind of like discussing. They love talking. They love communicating, right? But their communication is more kind of playful, a lot more playful, like, and not just playful, like, not just playful in terms of like lighthearted. It is lighthearted, but it's also a bit pushy, right? You know, it's banter, right? It's joking around. It's like kind of like touch, like kind of like communicating with as many different personalities as possible, right? Kind of like seeing how other people react, you know, reactions, and things of that nature, right? You know, like understanding the the emotions of other people, but from a very like kind of like like they're very interested in people, right? Specifically, how other people kind of react to existence, I guess. They live to kind of like see a lot of different perspectives from different people, right? But it's less analytical than like someone like myself. Like someone like myself is a delta. Like I love analyzing and looking at the world, the external world, through concept, right? Very conceptual. Very, like MBTI, very conceptual, right? But like the alphas are more direct. They still want to kind of see many different perspectives from it, but it's from an emotional, a feeling perspective, right? So they love directly kind of talking to people and joking around with them, or like, it's more direct, right? Instead of like this detached, like it, because concepts is detached, right? Like kind of like I'm like kind of like kind of wiring out the world like in kind of like a layer of concept, but like the alphas, right, they're kind of like just talking directly, communicating directly with the experiences of people, right? If that makes sense, right? And then the introverted personality is TISI, introverted thinking, introverted sensing. And what that is again, they retreat into this physical experience where they can kind of just work on certain elements of their environment or their collection or whatever it might be, right? Their kind of body of work in a very intense and pure way, right? They love an environment where they have control over, and the environment is highly regulated, right? Nothing excessive, right? Nothing excessive, nothing jarring. Not even jarring is the wrong word, but nothing like nothing superfluous. It's just an environment that is perfect, right? Like they love kind of just like organizing their environment, having and their hobbies tend to be like kind of like collecting things and organizing them in a very highly regulated way, right? Which is different from someone like myself. Like I love just feeling sensation, and they, in a sense, because they share introverted sensing. So like they're like, when they're introverted is when they sense, but like it's more that like they pair it with introverted thinking instead of introverted feeling, and so like for them it's more about kind of like the regulation of their environment as opposed to the feeling of their environment. If that makes sense, right? So like, having described all of those, I hope that like whatever type you have, right? So I've listed all of them. They should have been on screen. Then that should kind of ring bells for you. If it's wrong, then that probably means that like, I don't know, maybe you need to look deeper into it, right? But so I just want to kind of quickly touch on like the difference on like kind of like a further elucidation on extroversion and introversion, right? And how that affects how you should go about your life, right? So now that you know what type you are, now you know how your extroverted personality is and your introverted personality is, what does that mean, right? And I think I'll end with this, but like I said, every person has an extroverted or an introverted personality, at least based on, what I've talked about in this entry. Again, take what I say with a pinch of salt, because there's way more ways of interpreting the world that you need to kind of bring in also to kind of have a balanced viewpoint. I'm sure you know this, right? But you need an extroverted personality to meet with the world, right? And in general, extroversion is the means by which innovation is achieved. It's the means by which skill is built, how knowledge is gained, right? How mastery is acquired, right? So each and every person has a potential, right? And that potential is found within the part of themselves that is confident and outgoing, right? So you have a side of you, whether or not you're extroverted or introverted, like whether your preference is for extroversion or introversion, right? You have a side of you that is extroverted, that yields the gifts of what you could do to realize your potential, right? Maybe you'll be an excellent athlete, right? Maybe if you're like a gamma type, right? Again, these are just generalizations. I'm not saying if you're like an SFP or an NTJ, you should be an athlete, right? I'm just saying like as an illustration, right? Or maybe if you're like me, like, I love doing these entries, and the reason I love doing these entries is I love building my perspective. I love building my understanding. I love building my conceptual frameworks, right? And my ability to articulate those to people, right? That's why I do these entries. Like, I gave up on doing these entries for like any form of monetary gain ages ago, right? That was one of my original kind of, I was like, maybe I could do this YouTube thing and make money. But it's like, no, right? Well, I don't know, right? Who knows? But like right now, the reason I still do these entries, right, even though I do them less frequently now because I have other things I need to focus on, like, is to keep my mind sharp. Because that's the side of me that is like outward going and always pushing like the envelope, right? There's a side of you that wants to push the envelope and to improve and to master, right? And now that I've outlined what that looks like to you, right? Either you're an alpha type, where you love exploring like kind of like perspectives and how people react to them and like what kind of emotional response certain kind of thoughts or ideas, get in people. Maybe you should do something like, maybe you should, I don't know, be a stand-up comedian, right? Or like maybe you should like be a filmmaker, right? Or like maybe you should do something that allows you to like connect with as many kind of humanistic perspectives as possible. Because you love exploring people's perspectives. You like seeing people's reactions. You like kind of like just like really understanding life through that lens of like, like what are people's experiences like, right? What are the reactions that they have to what kind of ideas they subscribe to, or what kind of like lifestyles they lead, right? And like that's where you want to kind of keep pushing. You want to keep kind of seeing different kind of like people's kind of responses and reactions to life, right? If you love that, you should do that, right? If you're a beta, right, you love like kind of sensation and exploring sensation and like just like kind of like really exploring what you like and what like kind of like gets your heartbeat going and like what excites you, right? You love like kind of like just launching yourself into the center of attention and just like kind of like just exploring different like kind of like ways to feel, right? That's what you love. So maybe you should do theater, right? Maybe you should maybe you should be a sexual healer. I don't fucking know, right? I'm not saying that like all betas are sex craved lunatics. I'm just saying like, that's what betas would be interested in. Like, again, not definitively, but like, it's like if you want to kind of like just explore sensation and to explore feeling, right? Then like you should launch yourself into it, right? Join a rock band or something, right? But anyway, gammas, like again, you love like kind of like novelty and you love pushing yourself and you love like seeing what's possible and you love kind of like just like seeing what works physically. Then you should do something physical like that, right? Either you're pushing yourself as an athlete or you're making the newest technology, or like you're going on adventures, you become a traveler and like you're just like traveling all over the place, or like and you're exploring different ways that people do things, right? you should do that, right? Or like, those like these YouTube street pranksters, they're like, well, that's a bit harder to say, right? It really depends what your motivation is, right? The gammas have a very pragmatic, material kind of a focus behind what they do. They just love like exploring what's possible, Whereas the betas are more kind of like it's more like kind of they want to go crazy and they want to see what happens, right? And then finally deltas like myself. Yeah, I already explained why. But like then you have an introverted personality, right? And aside from being the place where you recharge and where you feel yourself, well, feel in terms of you kind of go back to who you are, your identity, and you kind of get in touch with your own uniqueness and your own soul, right? What kind of gives you peace? What gives you stability, right? It is where your sense of equilibrium and also where your sense of purpose comes. Right? Your extroverted personality is where you explore, where you push the boundaries, where you see what's possible, where you really kind of like want to be on the leading edge, where everyone else that's like you is, right? You like that's where you want to go, right? That's where you want to explore, right? But your introverted personality is where your purpose lies in terms of like what kind of message do you want to leave? What kind of purpose do you have, right? There's something, there's that side of you is acutely aware of the problems in the world, right? Is another way of putting it. Where there's something that's lacking, right? Where like people of the opposite orientation like are kind of pushing too far, and you're like, whoa. Let's get back to basics. Let's really kind of focus on what's truly important, right? That's your introverted side, right? So for me, this is why I make music, honestly. I want to use music as like a healing modality, right? I want it to kind of serve as part of that landscape where people can come and be healed physically, right? So the kind of music I make is very sensual and dreamy and healing, right? That's the kind of music that I love to make, right? And I want to make. And yeah, if you're an alpha, TISI, you want to not necessarily preserve, but you want to create environments that are like you want to preserve things and ways of doing things that are effective, right? That have a certain quality about them, that isn't necessarily gotten by just innovation, right? Oh, there's one more thing I'll say as well at the end of it. Maybe I should have said it a bit earlier, but there was another point I wanted to make before I end this, which is about I mentioned like there's a similarity between deltas and betas, right? Myself and the betas, right? Even though one's loud and one's kind of like gentle, like me, and like, but I'm like really like kind of crazy with my ideas, and they have like a very central kind of core message that they stand by, right? I'll discuss that in a second, but like, yeah, so there are ways of doing things that have a quality. There's a way, there's certain things that fall by the wayside, but they have a quality that is not in just the new, right? So like as an alpha, maybe you want to like collect these things, right? Maybe you like collecting old music because it has a quality to it that is lost with all of the new music, right? As an example, maybe you like certain art, right? Because it has a certain kind of quality to it. Like maybe it was painted in a certain way, or it was filmed in a certain way that just does not, that isn't kind of present in like new stuff because it's all digital, right? For instance, right? Maybe you just love making like hand stitching things in a certain way, or painting things in a certain way, or like preparing food in a certain way that again has a quality that you know, right? Because you study the art form, you study the craft, right? It's a very mechanical thing, right? You study, like, you have very esoteric and specific knowledge on how something is done, or like what a certain quality that like something has, and you want to preserve it because to you there's a quality in that is sacrificed or brushed aside when it's just new stuff all the time, right? So like so for you want to preserve, for the alphas, they want to preserve like these quality things, and make sure that like quality, unique qualities of certain productions or certain kind of manufacture or architecture, for instance, is preserved, right? Because it has a quality about them, right? Betas, right? They kind of work towards a certain essential purpose, like I said, right? So you have a purpose, right? And you know that thing is super important, right? People should be themselves, right? Bullying shouldn't exist, corruption is wrong, right? There's something that you have at the center of what you're doing, right? And it's like, people do fucked up shit all the time, basically, right? To you, like, people do fucked up shit all the time. People are corrupt. People, take advantage of people. People push people down and stop them from being themselves, right? And you stand as a beacon, a heroic beacon that will tell people that they can be themselves, right? That corruption is wrong, that you should stand up to people who are disenfranchised, right? So like, you have a central purpose, right, that you champion, and you become the champion of that purpose, right? For all of the people who are disenfranchised, for all of the corruption that does exist, you're the force that that directly challenges that, right? So that's betas. Gammas, NIFI, right? You guys, SFPs and NTJs, there's a specialness to certain things that a lot of people basically push away, right? Because everyone's like, it's like there's so much kind of like crazy shit that people say, and like so much, just like people sometimes do like stupid shit, or like they do disrespectful shit, right? And what you feel is kind of this love towards the things that are important to you, right? To the ideas that are important to you. Like maybe it's your family, maybe it's like a certain story that you love, maybe it's a certain character that you love, maybe it's like a certain tradition that you love, right? And there's a respect for where you came from. There's a respect for like what once made you feel like seen or heard or loved or understood, right? And you want to keep that respect in, to honor that respect as much. So like really it's like the gammas love fighting for things that are forgotten and unloved and disrespected, right? They have like this. It's kind of similar to the betas, right? But for the betas, it's more of like a philosophy, right? They see a problem, or they see like kind of a a certain kind of aspect of reality that kind of needs the focus, right? If that makes sense, right? It's more of a kind of like a philosophical thing, I guess, right? It's more of like a conceptual thing. But like the gammas, like they love to protect and honor and fight for, you know, the things that are weak, that are important, that are special, right? You know, the things that other people miss or spit on or disrespect or like don't see as important, but like the things that kind of that are precious and we and you know, like people, you know, people who try really hard for other people, but like other people don't respect them and like they take advantage of them. Like the gammas really feel like they feel sorry for these people and they want to help them and they want to protect them, right? And generally they see like the importance in things like that that um they see kind of like the places where like there's vulnerability and it touches them and it's like I want to protect that, you know, like no, like people spit on it, people take advantage of it, but I won't, and I want to give myself to them. It's not necessarily like a fight, you know. Gammas like they do that, I guess, right? That's the cliche. It's like gammas kind of like they love to fight and protect, you know, things, you know, things like that. But like it's more that like they want to like they'll talk to that person. You know, if they feel sorry for someone, they'll talk to them. They'll make them feel better. Like if they see someone struggling, they'll help them, right? They'll like help them do it, or like they'll help them out in some other way. They'll talk to them. They'll tell them something that will make them feel better. Like this is what the gammas do. Right? It's more that like they have a sensitivity towards like people in need and things that need love and attention. Right? They kind of they feel that, and they feel like a sadness and sensitivity about them that makes them want to help. Right? So like I said, it's different from the betas, right? The betas, like it's more kind of it's more like an idea, right? You know, they have an idea, like, you know, and they want to like kind of, and that's their purpose. But like for the gammets, it's more that they're sensitive about like you know, the like, you know, things that people that like are handicapped, you know, as an example, or like something that makes them feel sorry for someone, or like the like it's like they feel that this tradition is important or something. They identify something as important and that needs love, and they give it to it, right? And their form of love is like they usually help the person out, or like they'll stick up to them and they'll say something positive about it, or you know, that kind of thing, right? And yeah, I've already described what the delta one is, but like, okay, so very long entry. Let me wrap this up. Okay, so excuse me. This is one last thing I'll leave with you, right? This entry didn't go the way I thought, but you know, I didn't really have a plan or anything. I just kind of like riffed. But like, the one other way of telling what, you know, what quadra you belong to, at least, is like, you know, are you a sensual philosophical person, right? These are your deltas and your betas. Or are you a friendly and practical person, right? And these are your alphas and gammas, right? The alphas and the gammas, right? They are the way that they approach, even though it's opposite orientations, right? The way that they approach, like kind of like thought, it's very like kind of playful, right? It's sensitive, you know. So they love like kind of like, that's why I use the term friendly, it's because they relate to people like in a very down to earth way. They joke about with them, they banter with them, right? There's no like kind of really like in-depth philosophical discussion in what they do, right? You know, you're not like you don't think in a complicated way, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just like the way that you like to communicate is in a very friendly way. If you're like a friendly type of a person, like you love like talking in a friendly way and joking around and stuff like that, then you're probably either an alpha or a gamma, right? And also like the way that you approach physical, like life, is very practical, right? I'm sensual, right? So like I'm part of the other group, but like so the way that I see the way that I experience life is like I love like kind of like feeling around my surroundings, and that's the way that I approach physicality. Is I feel through it, right? Instead of like thinking really calculated about it, right? But like if you're more of like a practical, down to earth person, then like you're really and you like common sense, and like it's like you do what's needed and what's like cool, right? As opposed to what makes you feel good, right? Then you're probably an alpha or gamma, right? And the other group, betas and deltas, right? We're sensual philosophicals, right? So ideologically, like we like kind of like concepts, philosophy, things like that. Our discussions tend to be very like philosophical and deep, right? Um, less kind of like banterish and down to earth, and more kind of like even when we joke around, it's like usually it's like kind of like sarcastic, right? It has a wit about it, right? Where like usually like there's some kind of ironic undertone in what you say, right? That's kind of symbolic of or represent. That's kind of typical of betas and deltas, and the way and the way that you approach physicality is you feel through it basically, right? It's more like, and you can tell this, right? I think that's a very profound kind of difference, right? I don't know if I described it well enough, but like there are some people like if you feel that people are weird, like like there are some weirdos out there because they do weird shit, right? You're probably an alpha and a gamma because like you're practically minded when it comes to physicality, and usually these people also kind of like say some weird shit that you don't understand, right? They're always talking about like like spirituality and shit like that. Then you're probably an alpha and gamma, right? Conversely, if people like are like kind of you find people are overly like kind of rough and not very sensitive, right? In the way that they do things, then like you're probably a beta or delta lemma. Like, because I find alphas and gammas like tend to kind of be more like, yeah, it's like do what you do, like like what the fuck are you doing, like kind of a thing, right? And you're like, I'm just, oh no, I'm just trying to, I'm just doing what I feel, kind of a thing, right? And also like they kind of talk to you like in a, it's like you would rather talk about like kind of deep and insightful things, but they just kind of want to like kind of joke around with you, right? Yeah, that's how you know. I hope that's helpful. Like that's something that I've come across. But anyway, at risk of this being an even longer entry than it already is, I'm going to end this here. But I hope that you found this insightful. If there's more interest for this kind of thing, I might do more of it. But I don't know. Like I feel that I need to take some time to develop. Like the thing is, like it's been 4 years since I did my last one, so I feel that yeah, it takes a long time for me to kind of, yeah. But anyway, there's a lot I could get into. But anyway, so yeah, I'll end with that. Yeah, I these entries on my vlog channel, at one point I was trying to do them once every week, but now I kind of just like whenever I have the time and whenever I feel like doing it, really. I have like a backlog of topics I could talk about, but like I think I'll just do it at my own pace because right now I'm trying to do a lot of other stuff in my life, and so that's why I haven't been as consistent with these videos. But regardless, I still want to do them because hey, it's something I enjoy doing. Right? It's my extroverted personality. So anyway, until next time, guys. Thank you for watching. If you watched through the whole thing, and if you have any questions or comments or anything, feel free to leave them in the description below. And yeah. I also like yeah, like like I said, I also do music, so feel free to check my music channel. And I also have a gaming channel, which again I haven't really been uploading to recently, but regardless, I hope that was helpful in some way. And yeah, until next time, guys, I will catch you then. Until then, stay safe, stay passionate, stay you, and now that you know yourself better, go for it, motherfucker. Alright. Thanks, guys. And I'll catch you soon. Peace out. Whoosh.